Good morning. My name is Amol Kharabe, and I'll be going over my qualitative research done in the area of ERP, specifically on how ERP is a dynamic source of change, complexity, and risk. At a high level, what this research set out to do was, it is no news to any one of us that organizations today are under increasing pressure to be agile, and they have to face market turbulence. Many drivers behind this increased globalization, competition, innovation. Many of these forces are driving organizations to be agile and to address turbulence. But at the same time, many of these organizations at the back end are running what are called enterprise resource planning solutions. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with ERP. Many of you are, I think. If not, think of them as, I see a hand there, as back-end systems of these multi-billion-dollar organizations which control pretty much all the business processes in an organization. Sales, finance, accounting, manufacturing, demand planning, warehouse management, inventory management. The way I think of it is, if you're familiar with the Terminator movie franchise, this is the closest I think you'll get to a cybernet if we ever get there. So these enterprise resource planning systems, these are considered to be key for making the organizations agile. But at the same time, when you look at the literature out there, you realize that these ERP solutions are built around standardized business processes, so they can then be used across multiple organizations. They are not customized for one specific organization, which results in the issue that many organizations consider them to be rigid, complex, difficult to change. So think of the dichotomy. At one end, you want the organization to be agile, move fast, and then you're putting in an ERP which can potentially not be agile. So that's the tension out there, which is a problem of practice. So if you look at the literature out there, ton of literature out there on implementing the ERP solution, and then determining success factors. If you do this, you'll be successful. If you don't do this, you'll not be successful. Some factors identified, but again, the focus is on the implementation side. However, there's very little research out there in terms of how do organizations manage this process between addressing external driven agility as well as then trying to adapt it to the constraints or the rigidity provided by the ERP solution inside the organization. So that gave rise to the research question, essentially stating how do organizations reconcile this external agility and internal rigidity, and what is the potential outcome of this reconciliation process? Started out with a fairly, with hindsight, simple and naive conceptual model. The literature out there showed that, well, you have an organization in this turbulent environment which results in changing business needs, gives rise to alignment gaps between what is needed to be done and what you have, results in adaptation activities, and those adaptation activities then result in ERP performance. Again, quite a few pieces of literature out there in terms of what could be moderating it, in terms of organizational structure, leadership, and culture. At the basic level, I would say this was a good scaffolding for us to go out and see what exactly is happening in this space. In terms of the structure of the research, we went out and identified 3 organizations which are in what we call the sustainment phase, have already been having ERP in the organization, ranging from between 3 years to 10 years. We identified 24 employees in these 3 organizations. They were all geographically located in central Ohio, 3 different disparate industry types. One was in retail, second was in logistics, third was consumer packaged goods, and as you can imagine, totally different business models. Retail, high profit margin, potentially, logistics, wafer-thin margins, so on and so forth. Annual revenues range of $2 to $9 billion. And in terms of the respondents, all the way from senior analysts, managers, directors, to C-level executives. So I have, I think, in the appendix on what the interview questions were. But essentially, this was a qualitative study trying to identify what is happening in this ERP space after you have implemented it. So 3 key findings from this research. And I think maybe the best way to look at these findings would be to look up the final model, as you can see, compared to the initial model. So what was going on out here was we expected to go in there and see the different kinds of business changes, primarily being driven by competition and economic changes. So that we expected, we saw that. But paradoxically, the surprising part was we found that ERP solution itself was a source of change to itself. It's almost a paradoxical statement. So what was happening out here was you put in an ERP application, and maybe I can use a specific example. In the consumer packaged goods organization, they found that, well, we put in an ERP application. It allowed them to analyze their data around how they are distributing their products. That led them to realize that in specific business units, they were sending less than a truckload of goods to their specific retailers. So the truck is half empty. Now, they could very well combine this across the business units and across products and make it a full truckload, save on the distribution costs. So the ERP gave them the analytical tools to identify the problem. Based on that, they said, oh, okay, we'll go ahead and do a co-distribution. We'll distribute multiple products from the same place. As you can imagine, again, easier said than done, changing the business processes in the entire organization to co-distribute. They went through that process. But guess what? Where are those processes implemented? They are implemented back in ERP. So now you've got to go ahead and make those changes back again in the ERP. The ERP itself was a source of change for itself. Second finding, so this actually refers to this path. So this blue path forward, we expected that. Source of change led to cross-boundary teaming, IT and business working together, resulting in the process change. But then this loop back into the ERP, that was finding number 1. The second finding was, so again, this was a little bit of a paradoxical statement. And this was actually a quote from one of the respondents, that the organization is trying to go fast, is trying to be agile. In the process, you're identifying what are all these process changes. These process changes are then resulting in cross-boundary teaming, people working together across IT and business. But actually, all that is actually making things slower, rigid at the local level. So agility at the top end is actually leading to rigidity within the organization. So that was an interesting part of how this cross-boundary teaming was leading to additional complexity, but also was then many times leading back to additional cross-boundary teaming. I'm not sure if I have the time, but a good example was, again, in the retail segment. So they put in an ERP. The ERP then gives them a lot of data. Based on that, they determine, well, there's all this junk in many of these stores that they really shouldn't be carrying, and nobody's buying it, and it eventually lands up in these clearance stores. So once they identified that, says, okay, we are not going to carry that. Well, what do you do with the clearance stores now? They don't have much stuff to sell, so now they have to revamp these clearance stores as normal stores and start carrying normal inventory. So that requires, again, cross-boundary teaming, people coming together and determining what needs to be done, processes change, ERP change. But then that led to an additional complexity out here, saying, well, there's all these tons of this change in this $9 billion organization for the ERP solution. we already have other changes in the pipeline. How can all of these go together at the same time? So now they have to come up with an elaborate release strategy. Oh, we won't put them as we want them. We'll put them every 3 months. Okay, good. They come to an agreement in cross-boundary teaming. What goes on in each of these releases? Okay, there's a whole governance structure now that you have to put in at the local level. So the complexity led to cross-boundary teaming, leading to more complexity, and which was effectively making it slow at the local level. And that was finding number 2. And then the third finding was all of these complexity that was coming up was actually increasing risk. So this was something, when we had talked at the C level, well, nobody was talking about it. Everything is cool, everything is fine. When you talk at the senior analyst level, you talk at the manager level, so they are saying, well, all this stuff that is going on is causing all these increased risks for this organization to take. One example was, remember this cross-boundary teaming? So one of the steps that some of these organizations took was, well, we want IT and business to work together. They need to be integrated. So they actually moved some of the IT functions to report into the business end. You would think that's good. Everybody's aligned, integrated. But what happened now? Now you had technical folks who have to manage the security in this application, who can access and see what data, reporting to the same people whom they're supposed to be controlling. So you have a classic conflict of interest. And that is against Sarbanes-Oxley regulations for a publicly traded company. So that's something that is coming out of all this complexity. Now you're having an increased risk. Another example that they give on the risk part was the speed at which these changes were being put into the ERP. That was increasing the risk that things might get broken easier and much more faster. And that was increasing the risk, again, to the organization of the ERP responding to any change that the organization might need to put in place. So all of this essentially gave a big picture that ERP started out as a platform of agility, but these are the mechanisms by which that ERP was contributing to that agility, or maybe not contributing to that agility.
3 minutes.
Sure. That's right. So those were the 3 key findings that we had. And then when we look back, we found a strong similarity between the ERP in the technology arena and with structuration theory from Anthony Giddens. So those of you who are familiar with the structuration theory, it's a social theory, essentially says that there is a duality between social structures and agencies. So social structures control or influence the actions of human agents. But the human agents themselves then create those rules around social structures. So it's a duality. It's always continuously, recursively going on. Same thing appeared to be the case in the ERP space. ERP and processes are almost a duality. ERP gives rise to change in processes, and then those processes in turn influence ERP back. So there's a classic duality there. There is an adaptation of the structuration theory called adaptive structuration theory, which we found that could explain this reconciliation process very well. So at a high level, adaptive structuration theory states that you have structures of technology. So in this case, these were structures or rules or process rules imposed by the ERP. There are other sources of structures in terms of how this organization works. They feed into this what is called an appropriation process. The appropriation process is the appropriation of the structures. What are the structures that you have in place? Being changed, not automatically. Somebody has to make a decision. Some human being has to make a decision. So you have decision processes. And in the ERP space, that was essentially prioritization of what needs to be done, when, and how. Those decision processes then leading to 3 things. Decision outcomes, whether you have an optimized process or not. New social structures, which is how close are you bringing the stakeholders across business and IT? And then the third one, which is emergent sources of structures. So this was that recursive loop back. Process changes, feeding back into that ERP change. So we found a fairly elegant way of looking at the ERP space using structuration theory from Giddens. That's it. So I have a ton of supporting material if anybody ever wants to look at this deck. But any questions?